so there's a lot to digest after those 3 presentations. So to look at it all in more detail and to consider what we should be doing with our forest estate, I'd like to invite up our first set of panellists. We have Henry Phillips, who is a forestry consultant and chair of the RDS Forestry Awards. John Devaney, Assistant Professor of Biology and Principal Investigator of the Forest Ecology and Global Change Lab at Maynooth University. If you could make your way up, please. Professor Brian Tobin, Professor of Forestry at UCD School of Agriculture and Food Science, and Tom Houlihan, Acting Head of the Forestry Development Department in Teagasc. So this is our panel, and again, just to let you know, there will be an opportunity to ask questions, and we would love if you could take part in the discussion, please. It's a great opportunity to pick at these great brains. So I'll let you get settled in first, gentlemen, before I start firing questions at you. Right, and Henry, you're closest to me, so I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
No problem.
As we heard in the presentations, Ireland has more privately owned forests than publicly owned ones, so you could say that maybe the best opportunity for growth is with the private landowner. So really, we need more trees, so we need to make it more attractive to plant trees, don't we?
Is this mic on?
I hope so, yeah.
Right. You're absolutely right, yeah. And to me, the answer is so simple, it's blindingly obvious, and it has been there, and it's been there for at least 20, if not 30 years. And that is to reward the forest owner for the carbon that is captured by their forests. At the moment, the state just takes it away and says, this is mine, and accounts for it in its national accounting. But the carbon belongs to the owner of the land. And that's been proven in countries like Australia, New Zealand, everywhere else, where there is this more advanced interpretation of forest carbon. So to me, to repeat it again, it's so simple. Start a forest carbon code, which can be audited, which can be run nationally, which has very few barriers for entry, which has simple rules and regulations, and reward the forest owner for the carbon that's captured over the period of the rotation. And that gives a guaranteed income, well, not a guaranteed income, but a sustainable income for 30 or 40 years. And that would be a game changer, absolutely, because the current thing where we have premiums for 15 or 20 years, it's not working. We know it's not working.
So it's carbon farming,
yes,
with the value handed to the landowner.
Don't just call it carbon farming. It's rewarding the owners of forests for the carbon that's been captured. If they want to manage their forests to maximise the carbon, that's up to them. And within that framework, they can do that and get paid for it.
Okay, thanks. Brian, I'm going to come to you now. We're very good at growing spruce in Ireland, but the quality of our hardwood forests is often criticised. What can we do to encourage more planting of that? And as we heard earlier, even in Patrick's presentation, that while spruce is the predominant timber used in construction, it doesn't have to be the sole timber used in construction, that there is a lot of potential for our broadleaf forests, so we need more of them.
Yes, we do. We need more of them. We need more forests because as we said at the very beginning, we are gleaning multiple ecosystem services. So we don't just want carbon. So maybe I might open a seam with my fellow colleague here. I'm not sure that we should concentrate perhaps immediately on carbon because, of course, with carbon and with the payment for carbon comes the responsibility for that carbon and the risk that if something happens to that carbon, then that responsibility still remains. However, if there's a market for a more basic product, I mean, carbon is just one of the outcomes that we can't take from forests. But if we're taking timber, if we're not afraid to accept that commercially managed forest and the production of commercial products, multiple commercial products, is a good thing. That we need to not only have more forests, but we need to have more productive forests. Jackie Cahill made a great point about the the ash dieback and the lessons we learned from that, I guess we should be careful about, because we made a big mistake in forestry. We, the foresters, planted ash the way we've actually learned we shouldn't. So we planted large areas as a monoculture. Maybe we were looking forward to high timber prices that ash hurley, but markets were promising us. And then, so this massive risk that we ignored came along.
So more diversity.
So we need diversity, but we need diversity of products as well. So we need to be careful that not only would we place too many eggs in a species basket, but also the products and the outcomes of that management. So there's a danger in managing purely for carbon, in fact for timber, or even for biodiversity. We need multiple aspects. So and to come back to your original questions, the hardwoods. I mean, the problem with forestry in Ireland, and the problem particularly in hardwood forests, is that the rotation is long, and we need to start that wheel turning. And we've managed to make that wheel turn for softwood forests. So we've turned now. The sector has run several rotations, and we have an industry that produces softwood products. But in order for a hardwood product system to develop, we need to have planted those forests. We need to set those rotations turning and to pull products so that we as McGetrick said, we achieve a cultural change, so that not only landowners see that the material that they plant, there is a commercial return from it, but the processing industry sees that there is a sustainable supply of useful and diverse material, and also builders, homeowners, and so on see that there is a choice in the products that is available for resourcing our living.
John, as Brian said, we saw the impact of, I suppose, if we over-relied on monoculture, and when we planted, I suppose, too many ash trees or too many of the wrong kind of ash trees. And one of the most important ecosystem services of forests is the impact it has on biodiversity. So a more diverse forest plantation is obviously what we need from a biodiversity point of view as well.
Yeah, well, that would definitely be something that I would argue. When we think of ecosystem services, biodiversity kind of underpins a lot of ecosystem services. And just to go back on what the panelists have said, I agree with both of them to some extent, in that if we're serious about thinking about the future of forestry and forests in Ireland, and thinking about how they can deliver multiple ecosystem services, I think we need to be thinking about, an increased focus on payment for those ecosystem services, carbon, but also other things. For example, flood attenuation is a major thing. But when we're thinking about different ecosystem services and the different presentations that we had earlier, the spectre that hangs over all of this is climate change. So we know that's going to intensify and get worse over the coming decades. So we're trying to kind of tweak and change forest model maybe in Ireland in a time where the climate is changing rapidly. So going back to what Bruna said, we need to ensure that we have resilience. And one thing that really underpins resilience is diversity. So that's both in terms of a diversity of tree species in forests, but also in the broader biodiversity in terms of plants and invertebrates and everything. And it underpins to what extent forests are productive, how they respond to things like increased CO2 in the atmosphere, how they're resilient to pests, how they mediate floodwaters. So sometimes I think when we think about managed forests, we see biodiversity as this kind of constraint and limitation, or we have to manage a certain way, which is kind of reducing our productivity. But I would maybe flip it around and say enhancing biodiversity is actually increasing, or can increase, the resilience of a forest, which is a benefit.
What Bruna did say as well is that sometimes there's too much focus on afforestation and not enough focus on our current stock. So I suppose to enhance the biodiversity in the forests we have already, is that a simple thing to do?
Absolutely not. Unfortunately, these things are really, really complicated. But there are definitely things we can do to make our existing production forests more sustainable from an environmental perspective, I would argue. For example, increased emphasis on continuous cover forestry, close to nature forestry. It certainly isn't a panacea and things that it can't be rolled out in every forest, but I think there's definitely opportunity to, from a biodiversity perspective, the two huge issues with the kind of more standard clear felling approach to forest management are a lack of light in the understory and clear felling at the end of the rotation, which have a devastating effect on biodiversity. So continuous cover forestry can, by leaving more light into the forest floor, encouraging natural regeneration and cutting out that need for a clear fell, can really enhance biodiversity and build that resilience. But it's not, I don't think it's going to be used in every forest, but there are definitely ways we can enhance biodiversity in our current forest estate.
Okay. Tom, I'm coming to you from a Teagasc point of view. So there's a huge amount of ecosystem services provided by our forests. What are Teagasc doing to, I suppose, enhance them and to, I suppose, promote as well the value of our forests?
I suppose all our activities, and we have a series of national events, local events, local engagement with a lot of forest owners right through the year and right through our programme. And in terms of, and I suppose we need to keep in mind that ecosystem services encapsulate the provisioning services such as timber, fuel. It also looks at the regulating services, which, as was mentioned in the presentations, climate mitigation services, water quality protection, better air quality, and then there's the whole, I suppose, the cultural services, which can include, as Professor Nguyen was saying, recreation, social, cultural, aesthetic amenity in our forests as well. So just as an example, from the wood production side, we recently had a timber marketing event down near Limerick Junction, where we focused on the productive side of forests, showing owners the timber qualities that are required, networking with the sector in terms of the opportunities for mobilising the timber, the type of maybe returns that they would get from their timber, and also linking in with the processors. That's from the productive side. Just to give you an example, from the regulating side, we have a series of a national series of forest walks across the country, actually starting today, and it looks at the whole, I suppose, side of active management of the forest, and that can include building in diversity. So even within a productive forest, I think there is scope for biodiversity, and if we know within the current programme, Forest Type 12, which is mainly a conifer type forest system, it also includes open space. There's management of open space, management of forest edge. There's also a broadleaf component within that. We're actually having an event down at our Moore Park Centre on the 29th of May, and it's also looking at a regulating benefit of forestry, and that is establishing forests for water near an important water course that works in synergy with agriculture, that can actually protect the water and enhance it. And from the whole cultural side, provisioning of cultural benefits and ecosystem services, we have case studies out there where that shows people maybe can look at, I suppose, incorporating forests that have a cultural benefit, have a health benefit. And I'm thinking one example in County Roscommon, where owners of an organic farm have put in a native woodland, and that's part of an ecotherapy process. So I think there's a whole range there, but we work with forest owners, we see what the objectives are, and I think there's a need for a balanced series of forest types across the landscape, but we work with them to hopefully achieve their objectives.
We've touched on a lot of the benefits of forestry from a biodiversity, carbon and recreational point of view. But Henry, they play an important role in economic and rural development as well. I mean, there's a lot of economic benefits to having an active forestry sector in Ireland, aren't there?
There are, yeah. And there was a recent study undertaken, of which I was part, where it assessed the direct and indirect impact of afforestation and reforestation and how that filters down into the local economy. So you have not just the nurseries, which are rurally based, providing the trees. You have the contractors, which are rurally based. You have the sawmills, which are in small towns and rurally based, and so on and so forth. And when you add it all up, it comes to a sizable amount. Like the estimate is around 12,000 jobs, which are connected with forestry. And that's a significant employer in rural Ireland today. Unfortunately, as technology increases, particularly in the area of harvesting, the number of jobs that are generated per 1 million cubic metre decreases. And as technology increases in terms of afforestation and reforestation, the jobs contract. So we need to be able to add more value to products in terms of not just producing firewood, but adding value to it and so on and so forth, to get this multiplier effect that forestry can give into the rural economy.
That's something actually, because Brian, we've been talking about the resilience of our forests and future-proofing our forests, but we also need to look at the resilience of the industry and the sector as a whole and future-proof that, don't we?
Exactly. So, I mean, yes, it's not just the forest on the land, but it's the industry and the economy attached to it, but also the social fabric that's interweaved around it. And I mean, we find ourselves actually with something of a curious regulatory environment. So in forestry, we're perhaps one of the most regulated sectors from a point of view of environmental performance, but also of commercial or industrial practice. So, I mean, a lot of the times, automatically, the industry feels that as a limiting harness to where, and certainly it can be improved and made very much more efficient, but it can also be seen as an opportunity. I mean, we as a land use sector, we can see that as an opportunity if we're prepared to lead other production sectors. But of course, there should be a parity between land use sectors competing for the same land base. And so the going back to the resilience of the sector, then I mean the latest, the newest forestry program actually offers. Someone said somewhere that it's the most money for forestry anywhere in the world for growers, and yet we're not seeing growers, landowners aren't biting the hands off the supplier of that program, and that's partly because of the regulatory situation. So yeah, there needs to be less of a disconnect between the regulatory aspects and the on the ground growers.
If we look for the panel as a whole, if we look at the regulatory aspects, and Deputy Cahill mentioned, I suppose, the limitations on where we can plant trees and how restrictive they are. Is there a good scientific reason for them to be that restrictive, those limitations to be there? And is there any wriggle room in loosening it, do you think? Anyone in the panel? Yeah, John?
Well, my point on that would be, I think it depends what you're hoping to get from your forest. So the limitations on where trees might be planted are often through yield classes and how productive they'll be. But if your focus is slightly shifted away from commercial output and more towards carbon, flood control, biodiversity value, then absolutely I think there's wriggle room. So for example, in upland areas, there's lots of upland areas in Ireland where if you take grazers off the land, trees will come back naturally and grow quite happily. So perhaps we should allow planting of trees, or at least the natural colonization of trees in those areas. Maybe not if your focus is on commercial timber output, but if your focus is on other ecosystem services, then absolutely.
Anyone else in the panel have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I'd agree 100% with that. There's this expectation from not just from society, but from vested interests, I suppose is the best way to describe it, that every forest that's planted has to deliver everything under the sun. It's like if I'm an athlete, I'm meant to do the 100 metres, I'm meant to be able to swim, I'm meant to be able to shoot, I'm meant to be able to long jump, high jump, pole jump, triple jump, everything, all in one box.
Well able to do it all, Henry.
In my youth maybe, but not anymore, I'm afraid. And this is unreal. There are places suited for certain types of forests, as has been pointed out in the uplands and so on. And it's an absolutely different type of forestry. And we have this fixation that big conifer forests are bad, broadleaf forests are good. And this black and white is not the right way to be looking at things. Everything has its place within forestry, within the forest sector. And we have room for broadleaves and we have room for conifers. And conifers are driving this employment benefit in the rural economy. It's not broadleaves. And I have a great worry about the amount of broadleaves that have been planted. Will the forest actually be worked? If you have a forest that's worked and that's profitable, it will be sustainable because the owner will keep working it and it'll go on and on. So if you're producing small products from your broadleaf forest, you'll continue to do it, it'll be profitable, it'll be managed, and you'll get benefits from it. But a lot of what I see has been planted. I just worry, will it ever be worked? It's more or less planted for the grant and the premium.
Okay. Now, we do have a microphone here, so if anyone has any questions, please put your hand up. And while we're waiting for somebody to get brave enough to put their hand up to ask a question, I've one other. Anya was talking about, I suppose, the recreational as regards ecosystem services provided by forests, and it was quite interesting. I suppose we all fell in love with our forests during the pandemic, and it sounds like we're still in love with our forests. But the number of people who travelled by car, is there a need, or would it be possible in any way to focus on urban forests? Particularly when it comes to, I suppose from a biodiversity point of view as well, but when it comes to the recreational services provided by forests, is that something that we should or we could focus more on? Yeah, Dan.
So I would say there's definitely room for more urban forests, but also in the rural environment. And I think Professor Niguan painted a very positive picture in terms of people's view of recreation, and we've come across this, and there's the whole area of that was developed, I think, in Japan, the principle of forest bathing in the 1980s, and that going into a forest, whether it is be a rural or an urban setting, forests release chemicals that actually reduce stress. There's the physical activity, so I think there are, I would say, within the forestry programme, there's under forest type 3, I believe, that's development of public amenities. Forest type 4 can be neighbourhoods. And I think if there's strategic settings, whether it is towards the urban environment or in rural environment, there are opportunities there. There's good support to develop partnerships, both private and also in association with communities and the local authority, to develop amenities that I think will give a positive sense of what forests are about. And they can be both conifer and broadleaf. So I think there are opportunities there, really.
Right. Anyone else, anything to contribute on that?
Well, just to say that, of course, we could have more urban forests, but it's one of the things that COVID taught us, of course, was that we value much more our freedom, and worldwide, I think it was to 2017, or was it 2011? I forget the date, but at that point, the world population crossed a Rubicon, and the majority now across the globe live in urban settlements. And so, first of all, our requirement for the urban forest is actually perhaps not so much. I mean, the recreation, of course, is important, but we forget actually that it's a really important fabric for the amelioration of our living and working environment, and we need them as much for the value, the community value and the recreational value, but also for the environmental quality of our work and living space. But then our increased value of forests then to recreate in outside this urban area is then amplified, because actually, as we found in COVID, when you're restricted to a 5-kilometre circuit, all you want to do is get away. Yeah. And maybe we should, as a society, again, this idea of cultural change, I mean, what do we mean by an urban forest? And likewise, agroforestry. What do we understand by agroforestry and the value of trees, the use of trees on a farm? And you know, the usual thing is we immediately think timber and so on, but just like the urban forest, actually we get an awful lot more value and services from trees on a farm, quite as in an agroforestry aspect at least, quite apart from the timber. Okay. You want to come in on that, John?
Yeah, just to briefly say, in terms of the idea of woodlands for health, you know, in a way it can seem like quite an abstract concept that you're, you know, prioritising, you know, mental health, for example, in woodlands. But actually, we're seeing more and more that this actually does have an economic benefit. If you're providing spaces for people to deal with anxiety or other issues, that there is less GP visits, less, you know, treatment. So there is actually an economic benefit to that, which I think then means that if you are managing woodlands for health, that the forest owner needs to be rewarded for providing that service. Yeah.
Keeping us all sane.
Exactly.
Okay, we do have a question from the floor here.
Thanks very much. Donald Whelan, Irish Timber Growers Association. First of all, may I congratulate all the presenters. Very good papers, a lot of food for thought there, and some very good research going on. There's going to be a lot of data coming from it. Two very quick points I'd like to make. And the first point is, and it could be discussed much more widely, but of course, ecosystem services and the vast range of ecosystem services, they're not mutually exclusive. So you can have a Sitka spruce forest with 20% broadleaves. That's very good for recreation. That's very good for biodiversity. And there's a lot of other good research work going on to show that. So that's just one quick point I'll make. I'd also support Henry Phillips in relation to a forest carbon code, because that makes private forestry that much more economically sustainable. But a question that you asked there, Helen, I suppose in relation to blanket constraints on forestry. Brian and others have made points in relation to constraints and over-regulation. And I suppose I'll take up Deputy Cahill's point in relation to hen harrier, because there are blanket constraints there over very large sections of Ireland, but we now also have it in peat. And by the way, Deputy Cahill, you're doing great work in relation to forestry. Well done on that, continue it. But just in relation to hen harrier, blanket constraints, large areas of the country in all of these special protection areas. And of course, the mantra is that if you look at the details, all of the hen harrier areas, the survey shows that hen harrier numbers are falling. Yes, they're falling, all except for one hen harrier area, which has increased in the last survey and has traditionally increased in numbers, the hen harrier numbers, and that's the Slieve Blooms area. The Slieve Blooms area in the most recent survey has increased hen harrier numbers by 12%. The Slieve Blooms area has by far and away the highest catchment of forestry, has 64% forestry within the Slieve Blooms area. So that has to be looked at. Yes, all of the other areas have fallen in hen harrier numbers. But if you look at the catchment area, if you look at the special protection area with the lowest forest cover at 34%, that has by far and away the greatest fall in hen harrier numbers at -80%. So there's something going on here that doesn't explain, and forestry certainly isn't the villain in this piece. And oftentimes we get a press release from Birdwatch Ireland or from whoever that point a finger at something, but we have to look behind the figures. There's a lot of data there to be looked at, and it's important that both the sector and researchers maybe look at that a little bit more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone like to comment on that? No.
I mean, yes, it's true. I mean, blanket bans or paintbrush approaches. I mean, we all know that they don't work and they're not effective. It's not that they're not effective. They can be brutally effective, and that's the problem. But in the absence of information, there is little choice, and I guess that's the point that Donald's making there. We are generating more information. We do need more specific information, and peat is another area where we're suddenly really frightened of the impacts of the amount of carbon that peatlands can either store or release. But that's an issue for the country. I mean, that's nothing to do with forestry per se. I mean, so forestry, in that sense, shouldn't be afraid of having its hands not dirty, but covered in peat, because if we become stewards of an area, then we're responsible for that area. But you know, no matter who is responsible for a peat, that risk exists. So, I mean, forestry then, I guess, should almost be lauded for taking on peat. In the same way, though, we need much better information about the variability of peat and the consequent outcome from a carbon point of view, a carbon and greenhouse gas point of view. So there are a lot of situations where forestry, in fact, might end up being by far the better choice of management systems for some of those peat areas. Of course, not all.
So as the science changes, we need to change our practice then.
And as our understanding of
Our
those
understanding of the science changes.
site and soil types in particular, and even forest systems change.
Okay.
We need to adapt our regulatory and management systems.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Have we any other questions from the floor? We have a question from here. This lady there.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Moorer, and thank you very much all for the presentation so far and the discussion. It's been most interesting. I actually work in construction and urban design, and I think that the two very strong points have come across from what I've been listening to, one general and one specific. First of all, there's obviously a huge amount of research and debate in the diversity of what forestry means, or what area of life and environment it covers, whether it's experiential, whether it is managed or plantations, and how our environment benefits or suffers due to the mismanagement of the same. And this is a cultural shift, and that has been mentioned. I think this is one of the most important areas that we have to look at. I deal with SUDs and flood attenuations, that kind of thing. So SUDs is basically drainage management, water management, and in lots of areas. And it seems that we now understand our mismanagement of many systems, which are allied to our building and construction industry largely, and our lack of understanding or listening to local knowledge about the land typography and historic use of land in areas around the country has made ill-informed, it has caused problems perhaps, which we are now dealing with. And they are amplified by climate change. So the idea that we would have a holistic system that looks at land use, and this comes down to different types of farming, different types of land use and forestry, how that combines with it, and how an urban forest might come about. Because, of course, if we build on every piece of land that we have increasingly as we move out from our cities and towns, and then leave large areas of towns empty, they can become forest in the wrong sense. And we have no planting or forest, even linear parks, or any kind of green or substantially important breathing space or pauses within our cities, which could, and this I think comes down to different forest types as well, as you were describing, where their utility lies. So kind of looking at all of that, it seems that the idea of product coming from forest is really, really important for us, that we can use these forests at different levels of sequestration, or whether they're storage in their life cycles, from Bruna's talk, and that then how do we produce this benefit, which is from added value within it. And we still, of course, have to speak the language of what the economic value is. It's the only way that we can win an argument, whether it's in construction or forestry management or whatever. We have to make it appear that the mental health value is, benefit is more valuable to us as a society monetarily, very frequently, than anything else, to prove we can do it. So I think if we're looking at all of that, I mean, I was just thinking about black pig farming, acorns, Spain, all that kind of stuff. You know, so looking at the suitability, nothing being blanket, but there are incentives to look at holistically at land use, and whether it's through cycles of 5, 10, 30, 60 years, and how that management can happen, so that there can be a type of farming on land which is forested. Also, it doesn't just have to be timber production. And so my very specific construction question is, just generally, we don't use timber very often because construction costs are incredibly high. People are going to go for the lowest common denominator. Unfortunately, they're frequently the most polluting. There seems to be a huge incentive for the, you know, okay, you might go for thermal blocks, 3 times more expensive than a concrete block. But if I want to specify a building in timber, it's going to cost my client a lot more than that. All the builders say to me, and the builders merchants, is we're exporting all of our good timber for timber construction, and we're importing less good timber.
Okay. So,
and that's what
so
we
it's
have.
about encouraging the use of timber in construction more, or to
well, I'm just wondering where the, you know,
it.
Does the timber go, and why aren't we using our own timber that we make at the moment?
Okay, great. Okay, and I'll ask you to be brief because we're running out of time. So no. But we've one more question to come to, and then we'll be done. We'll move on to we will get the opportunity in the second panel. But I'm just conscious of time. So yeah.
There's an opportunity for regulation. I mean, if you allow the market to choose the route it takes, then of course people will choose the cheapest, most available option. But if we, as a country, as a nation, say that actually no, we need to make better decisions, so we could have a policy like Patrick McGetrick said. I mean, let's say where it's possible, let's consider timber first. If we make that quite a strong requirement, then, or we add tax to using cement or steel, so then we can change that decision quite easily.
Okay, that's great. We'll just come to one final question, and I know I will come back to you. Sorry about that. One final question before we move on to the next panel.
Jason Fleming, IFA National Forestry Chairman. I suppose I'm one of the only farmers in the room that...
You're coming up here in a second.
I will, yeah. I just want to ask a question. I suppose just a few points. There's a lot of questions why farmers and planting trees. We as farmers are supposed to carry on all the risk. I'm a farm that has 8 hectares, I think it was mentioned already. And I think you made a great point as well, Helen. I mean, we're all looking at promoting afforestation at the minute, especially over the last 6 months, and maybe not looking at the bigger picture. I'll see after what we have. The likes of, I mean, over 50% of the trees in this country is spruce. And I think that, look, we offer the biodiversity, but we have to have a market. Farmers are not going to plant trees unless there's a market at the end of the line. And look, I'll cover the rest of it at the top table. Thanks.
Okay. So a lot been asked of our farmers, and I'm sure that's acknowledged by the panel. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to actually ask all of these gentlemen to vacate their seats, please. We'll move things along, but I would like to thank very much our panel: Henry Phillips, Dr. John Devaney, Professor Brian Tobin, and Tom Houlihan. Thank you very much. And before those seats cool down, I'd like to invite up our second set of panellists, please. Marina Conway, CEO of Western Forestry Cooperative Society, Professor Mary Ryan, Environmental Economics and Rural Development Programme Coordinator at Teagasc, Jason Fleming, Chair of the IFA's Forestry Committee, and Seppi Hona, Regional Forest Inspector at the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So this is our second panel. And again, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Now, before you've even got a chance to get settled in, I'm going to start throwing questions at you. Marina, I suppose there's so much expected of our forests, and not all of those services that our forests provide are complementary. So I suppose, do we need to choose, or how do we choose which services are more important than the others?
Thanks, Helen. I think, look, it's impossible for every forest and every acre of land to develop or to deliver every benefit to society that we want, like Henry outlined, from the long jump to the high jump to the swim. We just can't do it. But sitting here today, I think really when it comes back to talking about what we want to deliver from our forests, I think there is an opportunity here for us to really seriously consider ecosystem services. So we shouldn't be thinking commerciality as only economic, as only what timber can provide, because our forests provide so many other services that aren't rewarded currently, such as carbon, such as water, such as biodiversity, such as recreation. So, when Henry mentioned there about delivering a forest carbon code for the country, which then would really allow maybe forest owners to decide what type of forest they want to plant. And, Jason brought up there again about, commerciality. We think commerciality only is timber. I think we've got to stop thinking like that, but at the moment, we're only rewarding commerciality through timber because we have no other system. It's like in our land use in general, I think, in this country. We have intensive land use and we have extensive land use. Intensive land use is economic output, and extensive land use is meant to provide all the biodiversity and environmental benefits that are not being provided by our intensive land use. So really, if we're serious about delivering more forests in this country, should we not have a system where people can decide that I'm going to manage my forest for timber, I'm going to manage it for carbon, I'm going to manage it for water, or I'm going to manage it for biodiversity? So our native woodlands should be considered equally as important as our thickest spruce woodlands. So I know what you're saying, Jason, at the moment they're not, because they're only looked at in terms of timber value. And that's where we're absolutely failing as a country. It's where we're failing with our policy, and we're relying solely on incentivisation, on premiums to encourage people into forestry, which again, in my 28 years in forestry, I would say now is actually the wrong way to do it. And it's the wrong way that we're going about it.
Jason, your views on because we did hear from the panel about, I suppose, that from the recreational point of view, do we put value on the benefits to our mental and physical health, access to forests, from a carbon point of view, all of the different ecosystem services? Is that something that farmers should be paid for providing?
I'd agree 100%, but I suppose the problem with that is farmers have only, the hectares are small, as you stated early on. It's 7 or 8 hectares the average farmer has, so I think it should be combined between 3 or 4 farmers maybe if you wanted to work something like that, but I think obviously there should be payment. It doesn't matter what way we look at it. If farmers are putting land into forestry, they need to be financially compensated for that. And as I said, and maybe I should have waited till I came up, but looking how much, to be fair, before I do start, I must thank Deputy Cahill. He was very supportive, I suppose, with forestry, and he listened before the Joint Directors Committee a few times, and especially over, I suppose, the Ash Dieback event there, and we appreciate, look, we didn't get everything we wanted, but it's a big step forward.
When did you plant your trees on your farm, and why did you do it?
Well, I suppose it was my dad planted, maybe I have two plots, but I suppose, why do we plant? Look, it's financial, to be fair, first and foremost. I'm not going to say any different. I mean, we're talking about my first crop is probably 30 years, and that's 10 acres and that. But the problem with that is it's very hard to get harvesters or any guy to come in to do small plots like 10 acres or 5 and so on, and that's a big problem on the ground, especially now going forward, because, I mean, especially the way the whole forestry sector has gone, a lot of harvesters and machines, they're gone elsewhere because there was no work there over the last few years, so it wasn't financially viable to stay in the system. But I suppose my second plot then is, it's like Donald said, and I agreed 100% with Donald with the hen harrier on the PT soils. I've hen harrier myself. I applied for my application to tin it. It took 4 years to get the tinning licence, and now we have a scenario when I did get it at the start of the year that I have to wait 6 months in the summer that I can't go near that site and make my road to get to tin that, and that's a big concern for us as well, because most of these sites are wet, and this is the time of the year we should be going in and putting the road in and getting the tinning out, and we just can't because of restrictions. Yeah.
And would those restrictions be one of the biggest obstacles to encouraging more farmers to plant trees?
Yeah, well, I suppose that's the biggest problem. Licensing is a massive concern for us. Like, I mean, if you put in a licence, you should be getting that licence within 4 and 6 months within the departmental guidelines, and that's why farmers are turning away from forestry. Because if you're waiting, which we were up to, I suppose 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 or 3 years for licence to go through the system, farmers are looking at our options here, and especially the demand for land at the minute with delegation and so on. So I just think when farmers are looking at it, when the applications do go in, and I appreciate, Sepine, that it is getting better, the system is getting better to get licences out, but we need licences out within the 4 to 6 months. And to might bring it, it's all about confidence in the sector, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, and it was mentioned with the last panel, it doesn't matter how much money we're throwing at farmers at the sector at the minute. They're not going to buy into it, because as I said already, the risks are too high. I mean, if you have 20 acres of land there, and there's a dairy farm next door, and to be fair to Deputy Cahill, you've covered it very well, and you're talking for 5 to 10 years, and it's tax-free money, and you get your land back. I mean, you're not going to put your land in, and especially the way we've been over the last 12 years, and I appreciate that what work is done around the disease and all that, but with the last 10 years and 12 years with ash dieback, I know we have a massive concern as well with imports from Scotland, with our biggest plantations in this country, which is spruce. And I just think that we need to be looking at that. And if farmers, like I say, are looking at planting trees, and they see the way the ash dieback farmers are treated over the last 12 years, and they see there's still imports coming from Scotland, and we're looking to upgrade the biosecurity measures, they're not going to put their land in because the risk is too high, right? Because there's farmers looking in over their ditches there with ash dieback, right, with the last 10 years, and the crop was dying. And they end up with nothing. And most of these farmers in their 70s, right, and it was a pension pot, and he's through college and stuff like that, and they ended up with zero.
The scheme has been, there is now a scheme to help.
Yeah, look, and that is, look, to be fair, and I did acknowledge that with Deputy Cahill early on, it's a massive step forward. Like I said early on, we didn't get everything we want, but it is definitely, it might bring a small bit of confidence back into the sector, because at least it's the first time that the Minister, the Department and the Government acknowledged that farmers are seriously out of pocket here.
Okay, great. Seppi, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in to address some of the things that Jason, I suppose, alluded to, and I suppose one of the issues, first of all, to acknowledge, listen, confidence is not where we in the department want it to be. You know, I think the announcement of the ash scheme, the renewed ash scheme, I think will hopefully go towards renewing that confidence a wee bit. We have a lot to do in relation to timelines. There is a commitment under the new Farmers Charter that will deliver licences that screen out within 6 months and licences that screen in for appropriate assessment in 9 months. Now, we have to go through a rigorous assessment process. These licences, they are considered projects under the Habitat and EIA directives. We have to legally go through these procedures. And we do want a robust licensing system. We don't want a situation where Deputy Cahill spoke about simplification. We do want a simplified system, but we want it to be robust. I don't know at the minute how many judicial reviews there are outstanding in the High Court in relation to forestry. There have been a few. So we're constantly being challenged. Forestry as a land use has been looked at very closely. I would probably see it in line with, strategic housing developments, large infrastructural projects. So we're on the firing line here from various angles. So we need to make sure that the system we are delivering is robust. And we're obviously coming through a period where, listen, we didn't have a very solid system. We had to make a lot of changes. But I think, going back to the team finding common ground, I think, we have a new forestry programme. I think Helen, you alluded to it. It's very lucrative. I think it addresses a plethora of options in relation to ecosystem services. You have your native woodland schemes, you have your productive forests. I would argue, in relation to what Marina was saying, I think even FT12 delivers most of those things. I think that absolutely does. We can produce quality timber between our environmental guidelines, our setbacks, protecting water quality, protecting hedgerows, planting additional broadleafs. I think it ticks a lot of the boxes, and I think we just need to, there's been a lot of negativity in forestry over the last few years. We have the ash scheme announced now. We need to slowly but surely now move to a more positive message, and we have to do our part in the department, absolutely. We're definitely not where we want to be in relation to afforestation. We have to pick up a lot of slack there, and we're committed to doing so. But just to...
And if we stick with, I suppose, a bit of positivity, and it's something we touched on, Mary, with the earlier panel as well, is the important role that forests play in economic and rural development, and also from a recreational and social point of view. Are we doing enough to develop those ecosystem services, do you think? Mary?
Sorry. Are we doing enough to develop those ecosystem services? I think there's, as Seppi said, the new scheme, there's definitely a much bigger focus on the diversity of different types of forests. As Henry said, and it's something that I just, the message needs to go out there that all forests deliver ecosystem services, but different forests deliver ecosystem services in different ways. There's a challenge in terms of, we'll say, economists look at data in terms of, we're lucky in that Bruna showed the graphic of where the growth cycle in forests is quite similar across all different species. It differs for every species, but they all grow typically where they grow quickly and then they get to maturity and they slow down. That means that from an economic perspective, we are able to value the different changes as things grow. And Cahill O'Donoghue and I are working on an EPA-funded project at the moment where we're looking at trying to connect the economic value of forests to some of the other ecosystem services. But there's a big challenge there when you try to look at, we'll say, the economic value of forest production is what we would call, we'll say, Jason's private value is his main overriding concern at the moment in terms of his ecosystem service. What money does it bring into your farm? When you try to connect that with the value of the public value, the value to the government, the value to society of things like biodiversity, it's really, really challenging. The one that we can connect without massive difficulty is carbon, because the production of carbon follows that S-shaped biomass curve. And what we're looking at the moment is we had done a lot in terms of connecting the production of carbon in Sitka forests with the economics. We're now, under the A4 project, we're now trying to develop that across other species. There's a massive challenge in relation to biodiversity, and that's the one we're trying to work on that with Trinity at the moment. And I know that some people here in the audience, we asked both foresters and ecologists to give their impression of the biodiversity value of different types of forests at different stages of growth. But that's kind of the big challenge. And if you listen to the radio, people tend to be a little bit polarized. They're either into the economic value or the biodiversity value, and sometimes you don't get both in the same type of forest. You can develop forests to cover both as well. I think somebody made the point that not only do we need to look at new forestry, which is what's happening in the new grant scheme at the moment, but we need to also look at how we manage how we manage the older forests in terms of what do we want from them. You can manage them differently to get different carbon outputs. And all those forests are delivering recreation, as Anya says, they're delivering carbon, they're delivering timber. And, maybe we need to think more about the whole multiple benefits of ecosystem services. And it's something in terms of, I'll shut up now in a second. I've done a lot of work on water quality in the last number of years. and the whole development of the thinking around the multiple benefits of water quality measures outside of forestry and agriculture in general. Anybody, who listens to the media knows that water quality is now becoming a big issue for on farms. And part of that is the challenges that we face in relation to the Water Framework Directive. But also it's a recognition of the way the whole system has come together within water, from the policy regulators to the scientists to the knowledge advisory people and the farmers. And there's an example of how this system has come together in a really positive way within water, where you have law pro scientists from the local authorities, you have ASSIP water quality advisors, and you have farmers working together. And just to bring it back into the forestry thing, as Tom said, there's going to be a really nice event on the 29th of May in Moore Park, where it's going to be about creating more knowledge around how Forests for Water, for that particular grant scheme, can assist farmers, particularly on intensive dairy farms, in terms of mediating losses of nutrients to water. And that's on the 29th of May. And the public will be, there will be details on the Teagasc Forestry website, and the start time will be from 11:30 to 12:30.
Great. Okay, thanks. Marie, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in. I think just when you brought up about, I guess, development, and we're developing ecosystem services, I suppose I just like to bring up a point that's been brought up many times with regard to forestry. I think the sector is in real dire need of a forestry development agency. We're the only natural resource in the country without one. We have afforestation targets, we have climate change targets, we have so many targets, and if we as a nation or our government is really serious about achieving these targets, we need a coordinated approach under one body. There's a very different mindset between regulation and development. Regulation is not development. So I believe we need an agency that is actually trying to bring together all the different points that we have discussed here today, which we're not. Everything is kind of operating in its silos. So, we're talking about all the great ideas people have for forestry in this country. We don't have the people to deliver it. We have nobody looking into that. We have a huge deficit of qualified people, and that's not just foresters, but that's also labour to be able to develop it. So we need a forestry development agency, a training institute, we need a research institute. We again have research operating within different silos. It's not a coordinated approach. So I think that, again, I would like to put it out to the government, and maybe the department might disagree with me here. If we're serious about forestry in this country, if we're really serious about leadership in this country with regard to forestry, we need a forestry development agency.
And there have been calls for a forestry development agency for quite a while now, and there's no sign of anything happening?
No. The whole sector has come together and signed up on a joint document and delivered it to government, and there hasn't been. And I don't think it's fair to put it on SEPI to ask him why not. But I don't know who else or why not. SEPI?
I'm not aware of any plans that there will be a forestry development agency. I would say it's a political question. But if I could follow on slightly, because I think the group we're looking at here about solutions. So I heard a lot about culture over the last couple of last half hour when we talk about culture in relation to how we manage our forests. I don't want to digress from the question, but just to I suppose to something to touch.
Like true politicians, Eddie.
Yeah, no, but I think culture is really important, because when we manage our forests, we're talking about very short rotation lengths in the Irish context. We're talking about commercial rotation lengths. It goes back to what Bruna and Patrick were saying. But like in forestry terms, forest crops should really be grown to maximum mean annual increment, the maximum potential they can grow to. Because even from a carbon point of view, you're maximising your embodied carbon in your end wood product, because you have more commercial wood product the longer you grow your rotation. So at the minute we're getting federal licences for Sitka spruce crops that are 25 years old because the market's good. But to make the analogy, for example, with farming, a farmer wouldn't bring sheep or cattle to the market, to the slaughterhouse, if they could wait 4 or 5 months to get another kilo. Why they'd wait? They sell it at the right time when they're heaviest and when the market demands it. But our commercial rotation lengths are quite short, and I think if we pushed, even from a cultural point of view and a solutions point of view, if we could push those out longer, manage the crops so we can get more commercial timber out of our crops, because that means we can put more timber into our buildings into commercial timber and have more, as I said, long-term embodied carbon. I think that's really key from a carbon point of view, you know.
And I suppose one of the issues, trees take a very long time to grow, and regulations around trees take a very long time to change, I suppose. But as regards things like that, what needs to be done, I suppose, this is for the entire panel, but what needs to be done to speed up those changes, or it's a bit like calendar farming by the calendar, but there are, I suppose there are changes that need to be brought about, aren't there, in the way that we manage our trees even as a crop?
I'll just come in just to say a few things. I suppose as forestry, forestry should be treated as a crop, and it's not at the moment as a farming crop. It's under the LULUCF, and I think that's one of our biggest concerns as farmers. I mean, I am a farmer. I don't know how many farmers are in the room, and I must mention that as well. There should be way more communication with farmers that's grown these trees, right? And there's not. If you had to put their hands up around the room to see how many farmers are here, I don't know what any. Maybe there's one.
Farmers are here.
There's one, yeah. But
no, we have another one here.
Well, yeah, but I just said it was Jackie. Sorry. But I'm just saying that there should be more communication with farmers on the ground. Look, what I'm hearing from farmers of forestry, and they're contacting me every day of the week, is they're selling to investment funds. They find it easier now to sell a plantation 15, 20, 25 years old to investment funds than take it on themselves with gas licensing. There's no carbon payment. So they just don't see it as a profitable option going forward. So they're just, and look, obviously, when I'm contacted, I do say, look, there is carbon payments coming forward here. We're hoping after, I think I was on a Brussels meeting the other day, and they're talking about after 2027 they are looking at carbon payment. But I just think that small things like a carbon payment, as I discussed already, getting licenses out when we need them. And I suppose around plant health as well, there seems to be no plant B, and I don't want to keep going back to plant health, but if something, a disease or a pest comes into this country, there is no plant B at the moment, and I think that's something the department should be working on. That there should be, if something comes in, there should be a framework laid out that this is the options on the ground. Yeah. Okay. If he wants to come in.
I just want to come in there. Like Jason's talking about, plant health controls, which are obviously vitally important to protect our forest resource. But on one hand, we have certain stakeholders calling for more intensification of commercial forestry, and on the other hand, where they're saying there's a risk to that resource. The answer is we need more resilience, we need more diverse species, we need more diverse conifers. We can grow productive conifers other than Sitka spruce. We definitely can. We're moving, in recent forestry programs, moving into better soils, so we can plant other conifers like Douglas fir, Norway spruce, Scots pine. So there are other options, and we need to build that resilience. There's no point shouting about there could be a pest coming in, what's going to happen to our Sitka spruce, and then at the same time pushing, you could say, for more spruce to be planted. It doesn't make sense, because in a European context, and I'm well aware of what's happening in the European context. You've had their Norway spruce sites ravaged by bark beetle. Foresters and forest owners are leading the charge for diversification here. Here, I sometimes find it's the other way. We're saying, geez, we need to plant more Sitka. It's the only tree that'll grow. I disagree. There's plenty of opportunities there to diversify, and it'll address some of the concerns.
And there's a number of reasons then to move away from the monocultural aspect of it. There's one thing I do want to come to.
Can I just respond to Seppi 1 second?
Yeah.
On the biodiversity, that's fine, Seppi, but there must be a market for the trees that we're putting in, right? My understanding, if you're putting native woodland trees at the minute, that we don't have mill in this country that can process them. I don't think we have.
And I suppose it's one thing then that did come up in Patrick's presentation as regards the commercial, to make planting different types of trees more commercially attractive. The research that's been done into the potential use of timber products from a wider variety of trees, and it's something I would like to put to the panel that the lady here in the audience mentioned, I suppose, to promote the use of timber in construction and the wood first policy in public buildings? And is that something I suppose you'd have an opinion on? And should it move a little bit further even? Should it, from the point of view of planning regulations, should there be or could there be a wood first policy, or at least to encourage more use of wood in our housing stock?
I'll just say one thing with regard to that, and I think it brings back to the carbon, and I was going to kind of maybe just come in on both Seppi and Jason there again about, you know, again, we're just looking at the timber. What about if we released all the ecosystem services? If we put a value on water, we put a value on carbon, we put a value as well on timber, then people will plant many different types of forests, you know, whereas at the moment, you know, Jason, it's only timber when you think it's thick as spruces because you know that that has a value, because at the moment there is no other value. But I mean, you know, the prices that are being forecasted that carbon is going to be worth, and in Professor O'Donoghue's report, you know, I think that even using 100, I think, you know, every 6,000 hectares of afforestation that we missed is a cost of 400 million to the economy, and that's just carbon alone. So to maybe answer your question about building with wood, again, there's an inherent value there in the stored carbon in our harvested wood products, which is another carbon value that a forest owner can get. So it's not just looking at the timber, and it allows people then to manage their forests in different ways. But it's a really big conversation as an industry that we need to have if we really want our forests to deliver all the different types of services that we want.
Okay, I'll just see if we have any questions. We have we'll get a question. I'll come over. Oh, actually, we'll be closer to you. So I might give the microphone to this gentleman here, and then we have someone over here. I'll come to you next. There. Yeah, there. Yeah.
Just a comment on biodiversity and I guess hardwoods. It's a very complex area. On the DAFM Next Gen Wood project across the 5 main universities, we've early stage research where people are addressing applications of like horse chestnut, oak, birch, ash, and a lot of other hardwoods. It's just that it takes a long time and it's complicated, but like good things are coming. It just takes time.
Okay, great. There's a gentleman here in the middle, sitting down there. Please.
Hi. Given the fact that we are newcomers to this whole thing, really, relatively, we have the second lowest, I think, cover of afforestation in Europe. And there's a lot of investment required long-term, both in terms of the financial and the agricultural land investment. And Europe, I think, lots of areas of Europe are 30+% coverage. Is there not things that we can learn in terms of all of the areas like eco, the commercial aspect to things, the recreational, etc., from all of those environments who are much probably better at doing it than we have been and have been doing it for a longer time? Should we not be looking at those areas across Europe, similar sized countries, you know, etc., with all the various conditions they have in terms of peat, etc., and the land use, and rather than kind of trying to reinvent the wheel here?
Right, and I might actually add to your question, and if we can learn anything from the other countries, when it comes to a forestry development agency, is that something that exists in other countries? And when it comes to putting an economic value on the various ecosystem services provided by forests, is that something that happens in other countries? If any of our panel can answer that.
I know in the UK that there's water credits, you know, that they've developed a system around water credits. I know that there is an international system for biodiversity credits. You know, there's obviously carbon. I worked in New Zealand on the emissions trading scheme in New Zealand, and that was a way of devolving the carbon value in the forest to forest owners. They still had an afforestation grant scheme, but if you opted into the grant scheme, the state retained your carbon, or if you decided to you know, just plant the forest yourself, then you managed your carbon value yourself. So there's definitely different models around there. I know that even here within Ireland, the Bank of Ireland developed the Woodland Nature Credit, which put a value on carbon, it put a value on biodiversity, and it put a value on water. So there are many models that we could come together and work on. You know, I don't know, does it belong in a regulatory model, or does it belong in a private carbon, you know, private model? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think there's a strong emphasis actually on you know, paying forest owners for ecosystem service in the EU Forest Strategy 2030. talks about paying forest owners, foresters even. So there is an intention there at EU level to help forest owners and the professions working in forestry to develop those schemes that Marina's talking about and to make them robust and stand up to scrutiny too, because there's obviously has to be a kind of an acceptance from society that will pay these services to forest owners, but I think that'll be an easy sell, like when you look at the benefits we can accrue,
Mary, would you see, are there any examples that you think we should be looking closely at or following?
Well, I'd say if I could go back to water quality again for a minute, water quality is going to be the big issue for 2024. And there are a lot of initiatives happening. One is that this year, at the moment, farmers are completing their BIS, their direct payment application forms, and each farmer will be taken through what is the water quality in my area and what is my potential impact on the water quality in my area. And what that comes back to in terms of behavioural terms, the more awareness that people have of what they're dealing with, the more positive that they're likely to behave towards it. So maybe, for instance, a suggestion could be that we're all here talking today about the ecosystem services from forests. There's, I don't know how many thousand forest owners out there now. Do they all know what ecosystem benefits their forests have? I doubt it very much. One of the ways might be that if the Forestry Division or whoever was to do, as part of their newsletter that goes out, the ecosystem service benefits from different types of forests. And okay, it might be that, we'll say, somebody prioritises the timber value or the biodiversity value or carbon or whatever. But people need that basic knowledge and awareness of what they're actually dealing with at the moment. And even, we'll say, where we are here today, there's going to be forestry awards later on today. There's going to be farm sustainability awards tomorrow. I've been at them before, and congratulations and thanks to the judging panel for the forestry awards is here. They've done great Trojan work in traipsing around the country trying to find the best examples of best practice. But we should be making a lot more of those, maybe even providing the links so that every farmer or every landowner who has land planted gets the links to those kind of examples of really creative, innovative best practice to see what can be done. And okay, so a lot of farmers and landowners planted because there was a premium there and it was maybe marginal land and it was the obvious thing to do. And Teagasc obviously do a lot of work with people, but you can't reach everybody. And we all know there are hard to reach people out there. So they're maybe just some simple kind of behavioural suggestions.
Okay, I'll come to you in a second. This gentleman over here, and then the Geraldine, the lady behind you, then we'll come to you.
Thanks, Helen. I didn't know whether you'd come to me again, but thank you.
You were the first. The way you were waving,
absolutely,
I
had to do it. But thank you. But it's I suppose it's to try and answer one of the questions that you asked. Well, what are the solutions? And I believe there are solutions. We're bogged down in a morass of constraints and regulation, and the panel have outlined that very well. Marina's point in relation to an agency, or call it public-private partnership, I think certainly must be the way forward, because we have a very top-down system at the moment. It's not a criticism of the department, but that's the way it's structured. And we're gathering an awful lot of data within that system. And I believe where we have a public-private partnership that can work together, call it an agency or whatever, I think the outcomes are going to be a lot better. I'll just give you a very quick example of that, and that's something I suppose that has been missing off the radar. But Patrick put up a slide there, and there were two innocuous logos that were put up on one of the slides, and that was PEFC and FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council and PFC. All of our timber, effectively, that's exported, or a lot for the home market, has to have one or both of these marks on it. And effectively, there has been a new standard for FSC introduced for Ireland about a month ago, on the 2nd of April. It's going to come into effect in mid-July. But the point is this: for our growers to be able to sell their timber into the market, they're going to have to get certified to this particular standard, or the PEFC standard. And my question is this: how does the panel believe that's going to affect private forestry and marketing into sawmills, because my reading of that particular standard is for a lot of the private sector, we won't be able to achieve the requirements of this international standard, which was a process that was set outside the country. And if we had an agency here that had overall responsibility, I believe we would have been much more effective in dialogue with this international standard.
Great.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Any views from the panel on that? Anyone want to answer it? No? The need for certification, I suppose, again, it's what you were touching on, Marina, the need for a development agency then, possibly.
Look, there is a need for certification. Obviously, in this country, we have two systems, and I guess your point, Donal, is that we now have a standard that you believe isn't going to be implementable in this country. Is that really what you're saying? For the private sector. And if we had an agency, if we actually had an agency who was there advocating for the sector rather than, again, everybody operating in their silos, we might have a better standard that was implementable. I agree. I don't disagree.
Just a quick one on that. I support a national development agency as well. Just on the national certification, I suppose most of us farmers, it's 70-30 when the mills reach the 30% that the timber is coming from the private sector, or the price of our timber is decreased significantly. So what we'll be calling for, I suppose, and I think there's a bit of work being done on it, and Seppi might cover it, is national certification being rolled out in this country for us. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to come in with that?
Yes, so there is the work ongoing to develop a national certification. But just to go on, that 70-30 rule, it will cause an issue if we don't address it, because we know the private forest estate is maturing. It's going to deliver a lot of the timber in the next 10, 20 years, so we do need to, something we need to tackle, you know.
Okay, Geraldine, there, you had a question.
Hi, afternoon. Geraldine O'Sullivan from the IFA. I suppose we're talking a lot about ecosystem services and the payments, but yet we've no clarity on where we're going to get the money to pay this. We've seen a lot of progress in the carbon market, and a lot of that was instigated through the emissions trading scheme, where we started putting a value on it. Just wondering, within, and Sevi, you mentioned at EU level there's more of a, do we need to start looking at it, creating a biodiversity offsetting system, or we need to start the realities of identifying a funding source for this and not continue to talk about it in the abstract? Because yes, we all want to see the ecosystem services valued, but there's no, in the short to medium term, the funding of that, the realisation of that, there's no clarity. And until we kind of get that, and I like the fact that within the carbon, it's a market-based. You know, farmers are very vulnerable, or forest owners are very vulnerable to any scheme-based system, because that, you know, that can change and radically change. So we do need to see kind of a market-based, some kind of system for this. So Mary, you know, from your research, or looking at trying to put that kind of ground level value. You know, we saw through the nature restoration, the debates, that there was a lot of figures thrown out about the value of nature. So there's a lot of high value on nature, but to try and get a baseline so that we could move forward and even just put average, or start that kind of putting a price on it.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, and you're dead right, Ger. The challenge is economics and carbon are some way compatible in terms of you're looking at that S-shaped growth curve. The big challenge is the biodiversity one, and I mentioned that A4 project, the EPA Department of Ag project, and what we will be able to do in that will be a starting point, but literally it's still at very early stages. And we've surveyed foresters and ecologists, and as you can imagine, the results coming back are quite different. And the difficult part of the project now is to try and make sense of all of these, and then to try and look at them in terms of the economics and the carbon as well. But it's very much a dipping the toe in the water, because it's so difficult, and biodiversity means different things to different people. Whereas carbon is carbon. You either sequester it or you don't. It's hugely challenging. But as you say, you know, and we know from talking to colleagues in other countries, the same challenges are across the EU, and not that much concrete work is done. It tends to be done on one side or the other, but bringing the two together is the hard part.
We've got do you want to go to that quickly, Maria, and then we've got a question here?
One comment, I suppose, or one way to look at it is back to what I said, is that we have intensive and extensive land use. So, you know, the intensive land use generally has a higher, you know, impact on the environment and water and biodiversity. So intensive land use could look at compensating the extensive land use is one way to look at it, because, right, what, like the carbon value at the moment is because Ireland faces fines as a value put on carbon. So we must also put a value as a country on water. We must also put a value as a country on biodiversity, and then that will help dictate the system and the land use that you want to operate.
Okay, we've got a question from here.
We took a decision in this country a number of decades ago to actually look at our natural resources and to actually drive those in a certain way by creating agencies for each one. They're quite evident. For example, the Marine Agency has transformed marine research in Ireland. You look at the Sustainable Energy Ireland, you look at food, Port Bia. But the one natural resource, as Marina pointed out, that has not had an agency such as that has been forestry. And I just cannot understand why, even though the sector has been calling for it now for about a decade, this is continuously ignored by the department and by the government. For example, if you look at the questions that have been raised here today, certification, that's now being addressed by the department. Forest Carbon Code, it's in Britain for 10 years now, still not being addressed here. So the point I'm making really is that we need a cohesive agency, National Development Agency. But what I would also say is that that would actually engage with government. For example, if you look at Present Minister for the Environment, who actually believes that wood energy has no role to play in Ireland. And if you looked at, we'll say, the Citizens' Assembly recently on biodiversity, they looked at a model such as Denmark, which is the leader in climate change in Europe. I would ask the question here, what is the percentage of energy generated in Denmark from renewable energy? 55% of their renewable energy program is biomass, mostly wood biomass. 22% is from wind energy. So Denmark actually would be quite close to being the laggards in Europe if they didn't adopt renewable energy. And yet here we have a government where the Minister for the Environment has distanced himself totally and actually opposes burning wood. Wood has a role to play in energy, as it has a role to play in construction, as it has a role to play in biodiversity. And the only way you can bring all those elements together is through a forestry development agency, I believe.
Well, I suppose it's the overriding message that I would think is coming from today. If we're looking at the how in this session, and there's a lot of calls for the establishment of an agency. Cahill, you had a question, I think, as well. We might get the microphone over there, please. Thank you.
Thanks. I was just coming back on the question of how we pay for carbon. Will we charge for carbon emissions? And we're increasing the cost of that carbon, €7 or €8 a tonne every year. We'll triple the carbon tax. We pay for carbon taxes. We have it in emissions trading schemes, but we don't pay for sequestration. So there will be a growing revenue from that until I guess we get to carbon neutrality. So there is a growing fund that is capable of paying for this. And I mean the economics of land use completely transforms at the value of carbon we'll see in 15 years' time. The value of the carbon stored in the trees will be higher than almost any other land use. But we don't have the mechanisms to deal with that right now. And going back to Henry's point earlier on today, but there are opportunities there, I think, which would be transformative.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're coming towards the end, so if anyone has a question, speak now or forever hold your silence. We have a question over here as well, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Dennis Berg, and I have spent approximately 61 years as a professional in the buying, valuing, selling of land for forestry, standing forests, felled timber for the state and privately. We've had an excellent presentation here to you and by you today. Thank you very much. Some of the best brains in Ireland are here in relation to forestry, but we are here looking at what we have dealt with in our collective careers. Are we proud of this? Could we have done better? could we perhaps stand back a little bit and look culturally at forestry in Ireland, not just through the eyes of a forester or a person who has a rural background, but through the urban people as well. They're the people who have to live in the estates, in the houses made from the Irish timber. We cannot correct the estates or the design of the houses. It's too late now, they're built. But I think that we can influence in some way the attitude towards forestry in Ireland, not by looking at today's people who are us, but tomorrow's people who are the children. And through the RDS, there may be a way of doing this by means of something similar to the science blasts, which have been of great effect throughout Irish society since they started. I think this is an idea which perhaps could be thought about over the next couple of years, and it might be worth considering some implementation of a change of cultural view of forestry.
I think that might be a nice way to finish up, actually, to push it. Thank you very much to push it to the panel, I suppose, that if the public value our forests more, then I suppose that even puts pressure politically on making the changes that need to happen. So, yeah, with COVID, we loved our forests for various reasons, but what can we do? Are we doing enough to educate and inform people as to just how valuable, for a myriad number of reasons, our forests are?
Just one thing, I think, yeah, sure, absolutely. More public awareness is necessary and vital. But also, I think, in terms of what I was saying earlier, forestry sometimes gets a bad rap, and we need to develop more kind of positive norms around the planting of forests, and greater understanding and greater kind of positivity, and holding up those, we'll say, RDS champions of forestry, you know, really getting it out there to everybody so that people have a more basic awareness and knowledge about why we have forests, why we need forests, and the different benefits that we can get from forests. You were mentioning
earlier about getting the message across to farmers and private landowners, but it's just as important possibly to get the message across to the general public.
Yeah, and water quality is showing us the way now at the moment. Yeah.
Right. Okay, Jason, you want to?
Just a quick one, I suppose. Most farmers would be happy enough to recreational and so on, but like as I said already, our plantations are too small. It's 8 hectares, and that's why the likes of Quilta, I suppose, and so on are being, I suppose, getting the lead in this. And I suppose just back to targets as well, and that has to be mentioned. We have a programme from government of 8,000 hectares. We're planting 1,600, and if you take out the PT soils, and this is important. The likes of Quilta are going to be taking out a lot of thousands of hectares of PT soils going forward here at the moment. And instead of reaching targets, it's backwards we're going, because then the likelihood is they won't be able to replant them, right? So that's where we're at. So, I mean, and I think that's important. But as far as biodiversity and so on, we as farmers are just on the carbon neutral as well. And when carbon has been mentioned a lot, and I didn't cover it 100%. I suppose I'm a suckler farmer myself, right? I have a bit of forestry to the bottom of my land, so I'm kind of carbon neutral inside my own gate, if the truth was told. But as I said, we're not being recognised for that. And I finish on this. I think it's communication from everyone that's what's needed here, and bring guys to the table, work with us on the ground. As landowners, as farmers, and we'll try to get a bit of confidence back into the sector. Thanks. There
you go. Will we leave the final word to the farmer, or do you want to come in, Marina, and say something?
No, I was just going to say, as well as, I suppose, the general public and as well as farmers, what's also key is our young people. We have a massive shortage of foresters in this country. We're now on the critical skills shortage list. We have to bring in people from abroad, so we really need to get a very positive message and communication and education out there to our young people as well, what a really good and positive career that it could be, and, you know, another role, I think, within the agency for the education and
that's within
development.
Schools, everything.
Absolutely, we need people to be doing forestry. Yeah,
great. Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our panellists, Seppi Hona, Marina Conway, Mary Ryan and Jason Fleming. Thank you all very much. And I'd like to thank all of you for your participation and for your questions. They were all very valued, so thank you all very much. And now I'd like to invite up to close proceedings Dr. Eugene Hendrick of Smart Earth Ireland and Chair of COFORT.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Helen, and thanks very much to the RDS for asking me to say a few concluding words from this very interesting event. Look, I've heard some very useful information here today and very useful points. I'm not going to repeat them all because obviously they're well made, and but I want to challenge a few things because that's what I like doing, and that's what I've been sort of asked to do. First of all, ecosystem services, you need to create a market, right? So there needs to be a commercial end to all of this, to Geraldine's point. So you need to market. You need to be able to be paid. So where's the money going to come from? They're very important questions. We don't have the answers to those here today. But in terms of the carbon side, which I know something about, some small bit about, I think it's important to realise a few things. And I won't bore you all with the minutiae of EU negotiations or that kind of area. But first of all, it's important that when you do carbon accounting, you measure all the pools, right? So you measure both the trees, the soil, the litter, and so on. But you also measure the wood products. The wood products are included. So when you do an accounting, and when Ireland Inc. does its accounting, it includes the wood products. The wood products are in there, right? They're not excluded. In fact, an anecdote, I spent a long part of my career, as you probably, some of you in this room may know, negotiating the various international protocols around forests and carbon. And we did get wood products included. It took a massive effort, but they're in there, and it's important to recognise that. The other thing is about to Donald Magner's excellent point, which of course I 100% agree with him, is around the energy space, okay, and forests. The lack of support at government level for use of wood for energy is absolutely appalling. It's a well-recognised, if you look across all the member states, right, Donald mentioned Denmark, the shining light in a way in terms of Europe, in terms of climate change and, in terms of the achievement of targets, whether it's the current targets or going towards our 2030 targets in Fit for 55, is Sweden. Sweden has the highest level of use of wood for energy in Europe. It's driven its compliance side to a considerable extent in terms of its targets through the use of wood for energy. And the question is often asked, are we burning all these trees? Should we not be putting them into wood products? It's not a dichotomy. It's actually a synergy. Because when you take out wood for energy purposes, you increase the value of your forest, not just by getting the income from the wood that goes to be combusted. It also adds value to your forest. And you can bring forward your forest rotation or your economic rotation, to Seppi's point, quicker because the trees that are left will grow faster. So it's not an either-or situation. It's a synergistic situation, and that point is, I think, is lost a bit in the dialogue. So it's really a good way to look at a holistic way of managing forests. It's not always the case in terms of an energy assortment, as we call it, but in many cases it can be. And it's only usually for one or two of the first interventions, and then at the end you can take out your residues and use those. So that's important, I think, in terms of challenging the thought. On this ecosystem services for carbon, I think really what needs there is some realism about what can be achieved and what can't be achieved. Additionality is so important in terms of carbon dynamics. Nobody should get paid for carbon that's already there on the ground. What you should get paid for is doing something additional, taking more carbon out of the atmosphere. That's what it's about. It's not getting paid for the carbon that's on your land. It's what you're doing that's above business as usual. That's really, really important, because the atmosphere doesn't see the carbon that's already there in the forest. What it sees is the change in the carbon dynamics. So that's essential, that we have a system that's based on additionality. Additionality, it's the most important thing. So when we talk about payments for ecosystem services and carbon in particular, it has to be additional, has to be above business as usual. And it might sound simple, but believe you me, it's not simple. It's very difficult, and it has to be very well modulated and regulated. Because, quite frankly, a lot of offsetting of carbon by forests on the voluntary market is open to question. There's been a lot of questions asked about it, legitimate questions in relation to baselines and avoided deforestation. The current proposal from the Commission, and that's now was voted through actually by the Parliament there on the 10th of April, specifically excludes avoided deforestation. It looks completely at additionality. And just to come to that point, it doesn't only deal with afforestation, it also deals with management of existing forests, which that's important. We heard already today, we can extend the rotation. And by extending the rotation, we get more carbon, we get increased uptake, a rate of carbon uptake. But it's very synergistic, I believe, with biodiversity, because we're growing the trees longer, we're keeping them on the ground, we're opening them up, hopefully by thinning and so on. So there's total synergies there as well between carbon and biodiversity. And that's important. I think it's really essential. And who does it, I don't know, but we should really look seriously at extending our rotations and bringing in some sort of incentive. I know it's not easy, but I think it's really, really essential. We tend to have a bit of an afforestation mania, maybe not too strong a word. Our existing forests really should be also considered in relation to delivering climate benefits in terms of additional sequestration. One thing, we heard a lot of information from our research colleagues, excellent presentations about forest recreation, about forest carbon, and so on, about timber. It's really, 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 very, very good to hear that. I just want to make, we heard about forest agency. I'll make another plea here today, more forest researchers. Do you know how many forest researchers we have in this country? Anybody take a guess? 4. 4 full-time forest researchers. It's an absolute disgrace that this country, where we're trying to build a forest resource, now there's excellent work going on in universities and through the funded programme, but 4 people, what are we trying to do here? The risks that we have in terms of our forest estate, from pests, from wind, and so on and so forth, there's nowhere near enough of a capacity to address those issues. 4 researchers. Come on, are we serious? Are we serious about forestry? I don't think we're serious about it. If we have that extremely low level, there's a lot of excellent work. Go back again to the funded research, but you need people there for the long haul as well, who build up expertise and have the skills and the knowledge to give confidence to the industry and to outside people who are looking into us, we're doing the right things. We're investing in our expertise in terms of forest research. And I think it's really an essential element of the sector going forward. So my final point, you'll be glad to hear, I won't keep you much longer, is this idea of scale. And I think Henry mentioned it. And I think it's so fundamental. We shouldn't, as Henry very nicely put it, we try to be the triathlete or the decathlete. We should be focusing, by and large, on ecosystem services in terms of a landscape level. What do I mean by that? Any forest that's established should, in my view, under the afforestation scheme, be very, very robust in terms of biodiversity provision, mixed species and so on, to the level needed. But at the same time, I think we need to focus in on the landscape and delivering for biodiversity particularly, in terms of value for money. We need to get scale, we need to get connectivity, and we need to get back to our native woodlands. So what I'm thinking about there is instead of, small areas of woodland, of biodiverse woodland out in the landscape that have no connectivity to any other area of woodland, what are they doing? I think it's questionable. I think what we should be doing is focusing instead on the existing remnant oak or native woodlands that are out there and expanding out from them. Because that's where I think most people would agree we'll get the best biodiversity change for our book. So I think this thing about, we can do everything in every forest just doesn't stack up. We need to have clarity of objectives. And, so I would urge that if there's any changes envisaged to the forest programme, that should be certainly considered, would be to have better connectivity to existing native woodlands. And at that, I leave you. And thanks very much for giving me this opportunity. And I hope you have a great lunch. Thanks very much.